This lecture is the first part in a series of lectures over the digestive system. This will predominantly discuss the different types of functional movements in the gastrointestinal tract, as well as the mechanisms in which various digestive activities are regulated. So we're going to start first with talking about the muscle that we have throughout the gastrointestinal tract. What we have is what we refer to as visceral smooth muscle, because there's actually two types of smooth muscle. You have visceral smooth muscle, which is also referred to as unitary smooth muscle. There is a smooth muscle that is referred to as multi-unitary, but you will not see this in the gastrointestinal tract, so we're going to put an X over that. Unitary smooth muscles, what we'd find lining blood vessels, the structures in the reproductive tract, the respiratory tract. So most things that we talk about, we discuss as unitary smooth muscle, which is also referred to as visceral smooth muscle. So the smooth muscle that we have has gap junctions, and the gap junctions allow ions to move from cell to cell very quickly, kind of like what you saw with the intercalated discs in cardiac muscle, which allows this muscle to act as a unit, hence the term unitary. It acts as a referred to as a functional syncytium. So they can kind of work together. Now, also, what's unique with the smooth muscle that we see in the GI tract, or I should say smooth muscle in general, is visceral smooth muscle is myogenic, just like cardiac muscle is myogenic. It does not need external stimuli to depolarize and self-excitate. It self-excites, or excites, I should say it that way, is they have pacemaker cells. And the pacemaker cells that we have in smooth muscle, in the visceral smooth muscle, is referred to as the interstitial cells of Kayes. These will spontaneously depolarize and then lead to, if it reaches threshold, then will generate action potentials. So we have that with the visceral smooth muscle. So it's myogenic, and it also has those gap junctions. Now, when we look at majority of the GI tract, we have two layers of smooth muscle. Now, the stomach will have three. It'll have an oblique layer too, but for most of the rest of the gastrointestinal tract, we have two layers of this smooth muscle, and it's part of what we refer to as the muscularis externa. We have a longitudinal layer, and we have a circular layer. So in here, the lumen, actually do a different color, where all the food would be, the layer that you have first surrounding it is going to be the circular layer, and then out here is a layer of longitudinal muscle. The fibers will be running this way here. These ones are going to be kind of going like this. So having these two layers of smooth muscle is going to aid in mixing movements as well as propulsive type movements. So we're going to look at the first type of propulsive type movements. Now, propulsive movements mean it's pretty much moving kind of propelling it, moving it forward. So actually, before I do that, I do have to mention one thing, is smooth muscle is also unique. I shouldn't say unique. It's like cardiac muscle, and that it can be influenced by a number of different things. Even though they're both myogenic, the contractile activity can be influenced by other factors. Smooth muscle can be influenced by the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. It can be influenced by the enteric nervous system. I'm going to put a big star by that one. The enteric nervous system is an intrinsic nervous system of the digestive tract. The other things that can influence the activity of the muscle would be stretch. So if you stretch the muscle, it will contract, and it has nothing to do with, there's no innervation at all. So if you stretch it, that muscle will contract. Another thing will be various hormones. So we're going to see how some of these affect certain movements in secretions too. So these things not only affect movements, but they also can influence secretory activities. So let's just talk about movements first. So the first propulsive type movement is referred to as peristalsis. So peristalsis is you have wave-like muscular contractions of the GI tract, in which contents are moved forward. And actually, peristalsis is not just in the gastrointestinal tract. Peristalsis is these wave-like muscular contractions, so you have any kind of tube-like structures. You get that in, say, the fallopian tubes or the vas deferens in the male. So in the GI tract, the peristalsis is where we have, say, this bolus of food is being propelled along it. And the thing is, in the GI tract, peristalsis should occur, it's very organized, it should occur in pretty much unidirectional. I can't even say it, unidirectional. It should be anterograde. So in AMP1, you may have learned about anterograde and retrograde, axonal transport. Well, anterograde is going forward. Retrograde is meaning going backwards. So peristalsis always goes from the orad to caudad, which means it goes from the mouth to the tail. So that's the direction it should. So if you're standing on your head and you swallow, it's still going to move down towards your rear end, okay? So what happens is the organized movement, which allows this forward movement, is this carefully controlled contractions of muscle behind and ahead of the bolus of food. So what happens is you will have contraction, because it says contraction of the circular layer of muscle behind the food, and you can kind of think of that makes sense. It's going to move it forward. Now the circular layer ahead of the bolus food needs to relax, otherwise it's not going anywhere. Now also simultaneously, the longitudinal layer of muscle behind that bolus of food, and here's our bolus of food here, that longitudinal layer is going behind it, will relax, but ahead of it, it contracts. So actually when it contracts, it's moving like this. So it's going to help it kind of move along. And this is the way you can kind of envision it, is if you ever had a really good pair of drawstring pants that, you know, may be really comfortable, and you did something, and all of a sudden the little tail ends of it, I can't remember what the term for the little ends of it with the little plastic thing on it, got into the hole, and they're like, oh, I can't grab it, so I can't tie it anymore, and you're trying to fish it back through to get out of that hole. And think about what you had to do with that cloth. You had to kind of move that cloth towards where the end of your drawstring was to try to get it towards that opening. So think of it how the longitudinal layer of muscle is doing. It's contracting so you can kind of move it, get this further ahead. Okay, that's the way I think of it. So this is very coordinated. Now, one of the key big things that will trigger peristalsis is just the presence of that bolus of food sitting there, and you stretch that muscle, it automatically will contract. But just think about it, why that's kind of important is the food's there, yep, I need to move myself forward, that'll help it move it forward. So stretch of that muscle is a very strong trigger for peristaltic movement. Another type of movement that we have are mass movements. Now, mass movements only occur in the large intestine, otherwise referred to as the colon. So what you're just seeing here is the large intestine. So this is the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and then the rectum. Now, mass movements, just like it sounds, is you have a whole bunch of the portions of the colon contract as a unit, and it moves the fecal contents, we say en masse, as one. So you'll have something like this, just all that move at once instead of just a little bit at a time. And they usually occur about 2 or 3 times a day, and that corresponds to generally your large meals. So that pretty much think about it, why it would do that. It's like, I need to free up room because new food's going to be coming in. So those are referred to as mass movements. They're very powerful peristaltic type contractions that are, again, a lot of them are triggered by stretch, but there'll be also something that will be discussed in lecture is different types of reflexes that can help with moving things along in the colon. I want to talk about some mixing movements now. So you have to move things along, but you also have to break that food particles down into parts where we can have digestive enzymes acting on it to break it down into the component parts so we can to absorb the various nutrients. So you need things like segmentation. It's just kind of like what it sounds like, and you can look at the picture here, is it's going to break it up into little segments, so it's going to break things up into smaller pieces. This occurs pretty much for the majority of your small intestine, because most of digestion takes place in the small intestine, and it will also take in very, very small portions of the large intestine, pretty much the earlier parts of the small intestine. So you have this predominantly in the small intestine. Another type of mixing movement we have is we call retropulsion. So you think propulsion means we're moving things forward. Retropulsion kind of means we're propelling things kind of backwards. So what happens in the stomach, now this is unique to the stomach, so retropulsion occurs in the stomach, is what happens is you have these contractions that begin up here in the stomach, and they move down, they can become more and more powerful, but depending on how much this pyloric sphincter is contracted, it's going to prevent the chyme, is what we refer to the material after you kind of mix things up in the stomach, it becomes like an oatmeal-like paste, is this chyme is what's supposed to go into the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. Well, if that pyloric sphincter is very contracted, not a lot of that's going to get through. So what happens is it starts to move backwards. And so what happens, we have kind of goes here, and then we go back. So this is your retropulsion, but that allows the food particles to kind of mix with various digestive components like acid and something called pepsin, which help to digest some proteins. And so you get, again, more, it's kind of a more mechanical, breakdown of food, and we starts having some chemical digestion of the food. So we have that retropulsion in the stomach. Now again, the gastric contents mix with all the secretions that we have in the stomach, and then eventually is what becomes what we refer to as chyme, which it's pronounced just like the herb thyme. So it's called chyme. So so you don't write that down. But you have chyme that enters into the duodenum. Now another type of mixing movement we have is something called HAUSTRATIONS. This occurs in the large intestine. And it's named because of the formation, I can't spell it, won't fit in there. Large intestine is the presence of something called haustra, which you see here, these bulging areas that you see all the way through the intestine. The haustra is actually a result of when the circular muscle contracts in the small intestine, and you have something called the tinea coli, which are these, which you have here in the gold, these three longitudinal strips of muscle that contract. Now this is what's the key thing is, the longitudinal layer of muscle in the large intestine is not intact. All you have is these three strips of muscle that kind of run along the sides of the intestine. It's not continuous. It's not like this, covering it. So I'm going to erase that. So what happens is you get the circular contracts, the tinea coli contract, and what happens is the areas that are not stimulated is going to bulge out. So these guys start to bulge out. Well, what's so important about that is as the fecal material is moving along, it's going to be moving along in this fashion this way. As it moves along, some of that fecal material is going to be moved off to the edge close to the mucosa, and where then it's exposed to the mucosa, where then you can have fluid and electrolytes that are being absorbed. The key thing is in all the nutrients, like your monosaccharides and your amino acids, those type of things have already been absorbed in the small intestine. In the large intestine, you're pretty much left with some water and electrolytes that are some electrolytes that will be absorbed. By having haustrations, you allows this, or this type of movement allows you to get more surface area for absorbing the fluid and electrolytes. Now here is you're seeing this longitudinally here. Here's a cross section, so you can see here's the Tinea coli here. So it's not all the way around, but the circular layer is continuous, but the longitudinal layer is not. Now here is some slides of the small intestine. So again, you can see the Tinea coli right there, and then you see it right here. It's a different section. So you got cross section here, you have a longitudinal section, so you can kind of see it. Now, last thing I want to discuss is an overview of control of digestive activities in the GI tract. Now, one of the things that control it are local factors. So the local factors include pH. So what's going on with pH at that point in that part of the digestive tract? You have physical stimulation, just physical contact of that food stuff on the wall can trigger movements or secretions. Chemicals, various, for example, presence of protein degradation products, say in the small intestine, that will trigger the control of the movements or of the release of chyme from the stomach. It will also control release of certain enzymes that are needed for digestion of protein degradation products. So you have pH, physical stimulation, chemical stimulation, plus also stretch is again a key regulator of digestive activity. So those would be considered local activities. Other ones that we have will be nervous system or the neural control. So the first one I want to look at, which you can kind of see one of it indicated right here, but I'm going to use a different picture, is I want to look at the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system, I'm going to put a big star by that because this is a major regulator of control, or the regulator and control is the same thing, major regulator of digestive activities. Enteric nervous system is specific for the nervous system. It's extensive, if not more, than the autonomic nervous system. So this is a very important neural control mechanism that we have in the digestive system. There's two major components to it. We have these network of neurons. We have two of them. We have one referred to as the myenteric plexus. The myenteric, you think the myo, that prefix means muscle. The myenteric plexus is located between the longitudinal and circular layers of muscle, and its job, because it's called myenteric, is it controls motility. The other one is referred to as the submucosal plexus, and it's located right in the submucosa, just as the name indicates. It's located in the submucosa, and since it's right beneath the mucosa, it's going to control secretions and, it controls secretions, but it also helps to control the amount of blood flow that's going to that portion of the gastrointestinal tract. So those are two major components of the enteric nervous system. So you have myenteric plexus and the submucosal plexus. But these guys work with the autonomic nervous system too. So the autonomic nervous system does also have some control over the digestive system, but the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system talk to each other. So we're going to look at kind of what the autonomic nervous system kind of does. And some of this would have been covered in an AMP1 when you did the autonomic nervous system. So it should be a review. So we're going to look at the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. Now the parasympathetic division it's called rest and digest. So it's all about digestion. So think about what it should do. It will increase secretions. It stimulates motility because you got to mix the stuff up, break things up. You need secretions. Will be things like enzymes and mucus to help aid in digestion. Sphincters, this is going to relax sphincters because I want things to move along through the digestive tract. And it also helps to aid in increasing blood flow. Now, the parasympathetic division is indicated over here. And as a reminder of the anatomy, which was covered again in AMP1, is the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is referred to as the craniosacral division, because there's a cranial division where it involves pretty much, it's the vagus, the vagal nerves, cranial nerve number 10. So the large part of, or large number of structures in the digestive tract is innervated by the vagus. Esophagus, the stomach, the pancreas, parts of the small intestine. So you have the vagus where it's innervating a large number, or a large part of the digestive tract. Now the sacral division originates in the sacral spinal cord, S2, 3, and 4, and they go through the pelvic splanchnic nerves, which then innervate, okay, spelled there. There we go, nerves. Then that, though, innervates just the lower parts of the large intestine. So it's going to be more of the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and rectum area, and sphincters involved in defecation. Now, the sympathetic division is referred to as the thoracolumbar division, because what you'll notice is the preganglionic neurons, the cell bodies, originate in the thoracic and lumbar spinal cord. Now, they go out and they synapse with cell bodies of postganglionic neurons in our various ganglia, our celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric ganglion, which then innervate various parts of the digestive tract. The celiac ganglia pretty much is like the stomach and the esophagus, the very upper parts. Superior mesenteric is primarily small intestine, and inferior mesenteric are the lower parts, more large intestine. So they innervate different parts. Now the sympathetic division, just think it's just the opposite, fight or flight. Sympathetic decreases secretions, decreases motility, it constricts sphincters, and it tends to decrease blood flow. Now, another major thing that does affect activities in the digestive tract is hormones. And we will talk about hormones as we talk about major things that take place in different regions. We'll start with the mouth, go in the esophagus, down to the stomach. So we'll talk about various hormones when they become, when we introduce them. So you have a table that you can go to refer to, but we'll talk about things like gastrin and cholecystokinin and motilin and secretin as we talk about the digestive tract. So this is the end of the first part of lectures over the digestive system.